Would you like to learn how to make this beautiful carrot cake, a variation on a type made in New Zealand? Stay tuned for the next episode of Hilltop Stovetop. Hello and welcome back to Hilltop Stovetop, the show where we're teaching you how to make great meals in an ordinary kitchen. Today we're going to be making carrot cake, and this was a request from the folks at Bridgewater Physiotherapy who thought that it might be a good addition to the repertoire. But we're kind of doing a slight twist on this. You'll notice that I'm wearing my New Zealand apron. And that's because today's recipe comes to us from New Zealand. And this is a cookbook from Edmonds Mills in New Zealand. This is a company that's been around since 1879, and they've been publishing cookbooks since 1955. And this is their take on carrot cake, which is a little different than what we would have in North America. Most of the North American recipes I came across had pineapple in them, as well as the carrots and the raisins. This one doesn't, and it's also made with whole wheat flour. And I chose this recipe for a couple of reasons. For one, the people who gave me the cookbook and the apron are the Calders from Wellington, New Zealand. And I've been trying to looking through the recipe book to find something that I thought would be appropriate. The other thing, and so thanks very much to Ellie and family who gave me all of these goodies for Christmas this year. And the other thing that I wanted to sort of highlight is how different recipes can be. There's be substitutions if you're looking at recipe books from other countries. For starters, a lot of other countries, the flour that they have is self-rising flour. So in North America, we always add baking powder or other leavening agents to our flour. And in a lot of countries, it's just assumed that it is self-rising flour. And I think about my friend Jane, who when she moved from Australia to Canada, couldn't figure out why her recipes wouldn't work. And it was because she didn't realize we needed to add baking powder. So the other thing that's different about this recipe is it's made with whole wheat flour. In the terms of this recipe, they call it wheatmeal flour. So when you're looking at recipes from other countries, you have to look at every ingredient and just see how is it different from what we would have here. So whole wheat flour is what we're going to be using today. And we're going to start by adding our spices to it. So we've got cinnamon, that's pretty familiar. But then they call for a thing called mixed spice, which is kind of the equivalent of our pumpkin spice. And it has cinnamon, cloves, allspice, nutmeg, and coriander in it. And it's supposed to have mace. I didn't happen to have mace in my spice rack. But mace it's derived from the nutmeg. So you've got the little nutmeg seed, which is this round thing. And mace is the outer coating of that. So it has a very similar flavor to nutmeg. So I've just added a little bit of extra nutmeg. It won't be quite the same, but it's as close as we're going to get. So we've got a couple of teaspoons of that. We have 2 teaspoons of baking soda, which is in the recipe. But we're also adding 3 teaspoons of baking powder, which is what will give it the equivalent of being the self-rising flour. And I'm also going to add about 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And self-rising flour also has salt already incorporated in that. So we'll start by mixing those things together. And you'll notice as we go along that this is very similar to the process that we used when we were doing the muffins. And so we're going to do our wet ingredients and our dry ingredients separate, and then very quickly mix them together. So we're adding in 2 cups of sugar. We'll get all of that mixed together. And then the other thing that's similar to muffins is we're going to add in all the fruits and nuts and things. So I've got 1/2 cup of chopped pecans here. Recipe calls for walnuts, but personally I prefer pecans to walnuts, so that's what I'm using. It calls for 2 cups of raisins. So I always take the raisins and I soak them in a little bit of water first, just to plump them up. But I'll drain off that water because that would really affect the proportions in the recipe if I left it in there. Mix that in. And we've got 3 cups of carrots. And if you, I grated 9 carrots. And if you have that many carrots, it's kind of, I wasn't sure how much was going to make 3 cups. So I grated a whole bunch, and the extra I'm just going to put in with my supper tonight. So we'll start by making sure that we've got all of the raisins and the carrots well coated with the flour. And I can tell already that this cake is going to be quite heavy. It's going to be almost closer to a Christmas cake, I would say. It has those beautiful aromas to it, but it's going to be a fairly thick cake. Okay, so now we'll start with our wet ingredients. So we've got 1.5 cups of oil, and to that we're going to add 4 eggs. Just take a fork. Whoops. Don't try that at home. Okay, so we're going to take a fork and just mix up those eggs in the oil. Split, that way you get the yolks broken. In some cases like this, a fork actually works better than a whisk would. Okay, take that and add that into our wet ingredient, or add the wet into the dry. That's what I wanted to do. Mix it all together. And just like we did with the muffins, we're going to mix this just until things are incorporated. We're not beating it any extra. Now, when I was putting this recipe together, I actually doubled what they said. The original recipe says to put it in a square pan, like an 8x8 pan, but I wanted one that was a little bigger, so I doubled it, and I'm going to be putting it into a Bundt pan. And even though this is a pan with non-stick coating, I did make sure that I sprayed it with oil before we started, because with the ridges that are on a Bundt pan, it looks really pretty unless it all sticks together. And this is one of these recipes that you can kind of delude yourself that it might almost be good for you because there's so much vegetables in it. One thing about this recipe is, other than the icing that we're going to put on it, it's dairy-free. It's not gluten-free, but it's dairy-free. Go. Now we're going to pop it in the oven. Of course, the recipe, the temperatures were in Celsius, and it was 180 degrees Celsius, which converts to 356 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to put it in at 350. I figure 6 degrees is going to be close enough. I'm just going to give this a little tap just to make sure I don't have any air bubbles in there. I'm going to put this in the oven for between 40 and 45 minutes until it springs back properly, and we'll see you when it's done. Alrighty, so we've had it in the oven now for 60 minutes, so 60 minutes. The recipe said between 40 and 45 minutes, but I checked it at those times and it wasn't done. And I would say that this is another variation in between the type of flour that it is and possibly even the size of the eggs that we were using. That's going to affect the moisture content. Actually, it looks pretty awesome if you ask me. But we'll test a couple of things. One is it should, when you just gently touch it, it should feel firm but bounce back. You take a toothpick and you stick it in, and that toothpick should come out clean, which it is doing. And the third thing is, you'll notice here that the cake is just starting to come away from the edges of the pan. And so it's got just that little bit of an edge where it's separated out. So those are all signs that it is done. So now we wait for it to cool. We leave it in the pan. I put it on a rack so that air can get underneath the pan as well. And we're going to let this cool to room temperature. Then we'll be able to take it out, and we're going to do a little cream cheese frosting on it, and we'll be good to go. So we'll see you in, an hour or so, okay? All right, we're back, and the cake has cooled enough that we're ready for our next step. So I'm just going to loosen it a bit from the sides. Seems to be in pretty good shape. With the Bundt Pan, I have this knife that is made out of, it's actually plastic, but that it kind of bends around the corners. And then the real tough one is the bit in the middle. Ta-da! All right, now we do have a couple of spots where it's stuck to the pan. That was our problem. It's really almost like a Christmas cake. Those of you that have watched my videos before know that I hate icing. I just don't have the patience to get it all mixed together. If you want to make your own cream cheese icing, it's just butter and cream cheese and icing sugar. But I find it much easier to just buy the canned or the bottled or whatever you want to call it type stuff. But what I've done with this is I put it in the double boiler and I just melted it down, just not all the way down, but enough that now we should be able to more pour this on rather than trying to ice it. In theory, it should give us a nice little drizzle here, I think. I think this might be why people are more likely to put carrot cakes into a square pan that they can just lift out rather than trying to do a presentation. So it does get a little sticky. So we've covered up all of the spots where it stuck to the bottom. We need to have a little more drizzle down the side, don't you think? So there we have it, New Zealand carrot cake. And now we're going to cut into it and see what it's like. I have high hopes for this because it smells so good. Very moist, very carroty, very raisiny. Smells amazing. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode where we've made carrot cake, and we also learned about converting recipes that are using different ingredients or a different measuring system than what we're used to. So hopefully you liked this, and that you'll let me know. And if there is something else that you'd like to learn how to make, put that down in the comments, and we'll see you next episode. Bye-bye for now.